I'm so pleased that after well over 2 decades in the public service, he still has a sense of humor. And that should qualify him for some kind of an award for sure. But he already won one in 2002, partly as a response to his key work in Labrador, developing an ecosystem forest management plan for District 19A. It was a consultative process with many public groups from both the Indigenous and the settler communities in the region. And in the press release that announced this was an award of excellence, a public service award of excellence. It said that he worked overtime with no compensation, and I quote that, which sounds a lot like a farmer, right? Yeah. Well, he's been an assistant deputy minister since 2007, first in forestry, then on April Fool's Day in 2011, started as ADM and Agri-Foods Development. He's currently the ADM of Agriculture and Lands for the provincial government. It's great to have him with us here today. And see, Keith, I didn't say anything about your keen eye for art or your dumpster diving, right? Okay, please welcome Keith Deering.
Don't forget his picture in the background.
Well, yeah, maybe he'll explain that one there.
I will. And first of all, thank you very much for that, Ivan. I guess that you brought back a lot of memories in your introduction, some of which were good, some of which not so good, but in any event, I always appreciate your animated introductions, and maybe one of these days I'll get the pleasure of bringing an introduction for you, maybe next year's Federation meeting. I can't explain the picture in the back. As you can see, I changed it out from yesterday because I thought Ivan was going to preclude my introduction with a dumpster diving analogy. But I did change it. And in fact, this particular picture that I have behind me is one that I face whenever I'm in the office. It actually sits in this corner of my office, and it's staring at me all the time. And it is a constant reminder to me of the importance of looking out to your people. And as this picture actually was taken by Kayla's dad, Kayla Snow's dad, and he emailed it to me, and it was a captivating thing for me that I decided to have it framed and put up on my wall. So Kayla, when you get home tonight, maybe you can ask your dad about this and what it meant for him, but there is a story behind it. So thanks again to the Federation for the opportunity to come out. I guess I'm glad to see everybody again, see a few new names on the list, not too many, even if it is, virtually. You guys will probably be glad to know that you're the proud participants in my 1 millionth video conference call since March of 2020. So I'm very proud of that accolade. Really, I'm probably not too far off when it comes to that number. But I long for the day when we can actually get together again face to face, as the minister said yesterday. And as he said once before, he's anxious to see some round people again. He's tired of looking at all these flat people on the screens, right? So I guess before I get started into my presentation, I really wanted to take the opportunity to say a few words about the excellent working relationship that the department has with the Federation of Agriculture. I guess, Wayne has brought some new leadership to this organization, which we have appreciated. Wayne, Terry Lynn, and Nikki. Always welcome participants in our conversations within the department. The work that the young farmers have done and are doing, as well as agriculture in the classroom, and the new piece that Kayla is looking after, the climate change piece, are all, as far as I'm concerned, leading the rest of the country in these particular spaces. And I think, folks who are participating in that will already know that. And, the climate change piece, I think, as you'll see in the rest of the time I'm going to spend with you today, is going to become increasingly important. And I think an area that we probably will want to think about expanding our attention to as we move forward with Federation activities over the next little while. I think as well, Gil, you had an excellent presentation. If you're still with us, I think I still see your name there. And it was a startling reminder to me about some of the very challenging times that a lot of our federal, provincial colleagues have been enduring, particularly over the last year. I think when it comes to strange weather events, we don't have anything that comes close to what they've experienced out in the prairies and out in British Columbia over the last little while, and I hope we don't. but it is a constant reminder that something is definitely changing here, and it's something that requires all of our collective attention. And I think that the title of the theme for this year's Federation meeting is very well placed. And I can see, based on the agenda, that there's obviously been a lot of focused attention on it. So I've been tied up the last couple of days actually with a deputy minister's meeting. I actually got grace to jump off for an hour to do this with you guys, but basically the focus of the attention on at the deputy minister's level is also very much occupied in this particular space as well. So I guess for the next 15 or 20 minutes, I'm going to give you an update on some of the activities since the last time we met. It's hard to believe it's been 2 years. I had to be reminded, I guess, why I didn't do this last year. And someone reminded me that, we were in a marathon election process that we couldn't seem to get out of last year. And we were probably set a record as well for the number of times I had to tell people we're in caretaker mode and couldn't really have anything to say. But so that's unfortunately the situation we're in last year, and we couldn't participate. So I do think that there's a lot to bring you up to speed on in terms of what we've been up to over the last couple of years. As well, if Melvin and the federal folks are on the line, I'm not sure how much they had to say about where we're going in the next policy framework agreement. Ivan, are you able to say if they focused on that? Because again, I wasn't able to participate yesterday. But
Sorry?
So in the presentation yesterday from Agriculture Canada, they spend much time talking about the next policy framework, because I can completely skip over that if they did.
No, not much time, no.
Okay, so I'll tell you a little bit about what's been really occupying our attention at the, oh, you got to jump back one actually, Matthew. There you go. Yeah, we've been very, very much focused on the next policy framework agreement. I'll tell you a little bit about that. And then I have one more slide at the end, which basically talks about a laundry list of issues that have been jumping up and biting us in the rear end over the last couple of weeks that we really need to have a discussion about. And hopefully there'll be some time at the end for some questions. So, of course, as we all know, where our agriculture sector is heading, there's been very substantial amount of strong local interest in and support for growth in the agriculture sector. And this is not just coming from policymakers, it's also coming from retailers and regulators and organizations like that as well. It's been incredible, actually, how many requests that we've had for meetings from organizations like Walmart and Sobeys and Costco and organizations like that to talk about what we need to do to increase local production, and that, to give them access to products that they can market. We've had a lot of success in our vegetable transplant program. I will admit to you that in the first year we did this, I kind of thought that we probably needed an exit strategy. We've been growing tree seedlings out at Wooddale for decades for the forest industry. And really the intent behind our vegetable transplant program was to get farmers thinking about some alternative varieties of transplants that they could plant. And as well, start to get them thinking about how they can actually construct greenhouse capacity of their own to produce vegetable transplants to jumpstart their growing season. And so it's grown from about 275,000 plants in the first year to what will be for sure above 5 million this year. And I got to be honest, I'm not sure I can see an exit strategy anymore. It's been resoundingly successful, and I think that it has done everything that we thought it would in terms of introducing farmers to new varieties, as well as encouraging new greenhouse construction. And also, of course, making substantial progress towards doubling our food security footprint. Just a quick update, because we spent a lot of time last year implementing numerous economic recovery initiatives. Our agricultural roads program, we had allocated about $1.4 million to build about 30 kilometers of access roads towards some of our agriculture areas of interest that otherwise were unaccessed. We spent about 2.75 million on mass potato production. And this was really land development out around Junction Brook. I think the minister called it the Jumpers Brook yesterday, but it's Junction Brook. I have a picture of this on my next slide. We have allocated and continue to have in our envelope a $5 million contribution towards secondary processing facility for dairy to be located in Deer Lake, we think. We've allocated and spent about $1.25 million on vegetable cold storage facilities, one on the west coast of the province out around Stephenville, and another one in Labrador and Goose Bay. We invested about $1 million in beef genetic enhancement, as well as $2.5 million for abattoir construction in the province, and that those projects are all done. Animals are on farm, and abattoirs have been constructed. I talked a little bit about the vegetable transplant program. In terms of honeybee production, we had expended about $300,000 towards enhancement of honeybee production equipment, as well as training and things like that for the Newfoundland Labrador Beekeepers Association. We invested about 1.5 million in regional farm equipment banks through this program. That one is very well established in Pinsbrook. We also have some equipment in Labrador, with more to come, I believe, as well as some equipment in Wooddale. We invested about $100,000 in virtual market opportunities. I guess the name slips me right now, but it's a food hub in Western Newfoundland, which is quite popular, I think. And of course, I will spend a little bit more time in the next couple of slides talking about Canadian Agriculture Partnership. So we, I guess, officially have not announced yet that we've reached our 20% target, but the last numbers, based on last year's land development season and growing season, we are at about 17.3%. And based on the amount of land that we have cleared out at Junction Brook, which is left to be put into production, we expect that we'll very early on in this growing season be able to announce that we've achieved our food self-sufficiency target. So I guess I won't speak to the other two items yet. There'll be a little bit more conversation about those in the future targeted state. Matthew, if you could advance my slide, I'd appreciate it. So this is one of my favorite pictures from last summer, I guess. So this is Junction Brook. It's hard to believe, I know, for a lot of people on the call. People from the west coast of the province will probably recognize it. But, you know, the first time I saw this, I'll never forget, it kind of took my breath away. You know, this sort of land does exist in the province. This particular area is about 600 hectares, something like that. We have about 500 hectares of it already cleared. And we have an area that is fairly close to it, which occupies about the same amount of space, that has equally productive soils and land on it. So, I mean, obviously this was very easy in terms of land development, not like you'll find in a lot of areas of the province. In a lot of cases, I mean, the bulldozer just went and took up the stumps, and this is what you had. There wasn't a whole lot of rock picking and there were things like that that had to be done. It was quite a remarkable area. About 100 acres of this went into potato production last year, and as I understand it, a majority of it will be put in production this year by M&M Farms. Next slide, Matthew. So, of course, I spent a little bit of time talking about what we've been doing at the FPT table with regards to our next policy framework agreement. First of all, I should acknowledge our federal partners in this. I know that there were a number of people participating in the call yesterday, and you know, obviously everything we do in the next policy framework space is in partnership with Agriculture Canada. So we really appreciate everything that our various policy framework agreements have been able to do for us, and we have high expectations, obviously, with the next policy framework agreement. Sorry, did someone want to jump in? No? No. So I guess as most folks on the call will know, because a lot of people were engaged in the process. We did undertake some consultations before ministers met in Guelph in November with our stakeholder groups. And I guess by now, most people have probably seen the What We Heard document. And what struck me, when I really didn't expect this, to be honest, was that all of the stakeholder groups that we had consulted with highlighted environment and climate change as one of their top priorities. In fact, most highlighted as the top priority. So I really didn't expect that, to be honest, for a number of reasons, not the least of which was the fact that in the current framework agreement, only about 6 or 7% of our total envelope is actually spent in this space. But I guess what it really demonstrates is that the things that we've seen happening in other jurisdictions, like in the Prairie Provinces and in British Columbia, serve as a reminder to all of us that, we all could be in this boat at any moment. And so, we recognize that the targets for environment and climate change are ambitious. And the provincial targets, by the way, Newfoundland and Labrador are very closely aligned with the federal targets. But it's time for ambition when it comes to setting climate change targets. And we think that agriculture has a prominent role to play in that. So I guess the vision, we call this the Guelph Statement, because basically what in terms of the timelines towards completion of a new agreement, the Guelph Statement was prepared by ministers in November to set the stage for the negotiation of the final agreement, which is due to be completed in July of 2022, I'm sorry. So effectively, when ministers meet again in Saskatoon in July, we will be expected to have completed all the details of the multilateral framework agreement and have ministers ready to sign it. So it's an interesting process to try to get 14 people like myself to sit in a room and decide what the words ought to be to describe a vision for agriculture to 2028. And what started out, I think, as a 17-page document could be condensed down into this one page and literally the statement that you see. And I almost got to catch my breath before I read this out because it's all one sentence. The Guelph Statement is that Canada is recognized as a world leader in sustainable agriculture and agri-food production and drives forward to 2028 from a solid foundation of regional strength and diversity, as well as strong leadership of the provinces and territories in order to rise to the climate change challenge, to expand new markets and trade while meeting the expectations of consumers, and to feed Canadians and a growing global population. So that's what you get when you put 14 people like me in a room to try to figure out what this should look like. And so obviously the priorities in terms of achieving that vision, strong priority on climate change and the environment. There'll be strong focus on science, research, and innovation. Very, dedicated focus towards domestic and global markets, and building sector capacity and growth through realizing the potential of value-added agri-food and agri-products, as well as enhancing resiliency to anticipate emergencies and things like that in our world. So looking at the time, I think I better jump to the next slide, Matthew. So I guess, the block that you see at the top of this page, this particular slide outlines the priorities and areas of focus for the next policy framework. And, a lot of these priorities that you see will, most folks will recognize as having been discussed at length during our consultations with the stakeholder groups. And I guess I draw your attention to the green block at the top, which basically says that the next policy framework will reflect the principles of sustainable development, allowing the agriculture and agri-food sector to meet the needs of today and grow for tomorrow without compromising the needs of future generations. And I guess in this space, I've always been a little bit worried about what it means to have an agriculture sector that is still expected to grow substantially, like the one that we have. There's not a lot of other jurisdictions in the world that are aiming to double their food security footprint right now. And so when we talk about land clearing and putting doubling or tripling or quadrupling our beef production, those things are not necessarily always aligned with climate change objectives. And so I guess there was a recognition at the table for jurisdictions like Newfoundland and Labrador, who are, aggressively trying to grow our sector, that there's a need for those sorts of things to continue as well. And in fact, by growing our sector, actually, contributes to finding the climate change balance that we're actually looking for. So the pillars that you see here are very much, they sound a lot like the ones that we've had in our current agreement. And so there's still lots of work that needs to be done to finalize these things in the form of a multilateral framework agreement. And we would hope that by July, we will be there. So by the way, all of this is available online, all of these details, and I can certainly send along a link where you can find these documents so you can print them off as well. Next slide, Matthew, please. So in terms of what needs to be done next to bring this home, I guess the ministerial policy statement was completed in November. Again, we expect to be in a position to have the multilateral framework agreement signed by ministers in July of 2022. That's our objective. By April 1st, 2023, we expect to be able to roll the new agreement out, whatever it will be called. I like to call it a Canadian Agriculture Partnership 2.0. I'm not sure if it will be called that, but most folks will remember the transition from Growing Forward, went from GF1 to GF2. Maybe it'll be called something completely different. We don't know yet. But obviously there's some expectation for stakeholder engagement throughout the process. And we do expect that before the multilateral framework agreement is actually signed by ministers in July, that we'll be required to reach out to stakeholders again to let them know where we are at this point with the negotiations. Yeah, I don't think I'll say anything else about that at this point. I could go on all day about business risk management, but because that does seem to occupy a lot of the conversation amongst our FPT colleagues. Essentially, as we all know, the subscription to business risk management is not anything like it is in many of the other jurisdictions that are big in grains and oilseeds. And there are substantive discussions trying to figure out what the best formula is for business risk management. And a lot of times we find ourselves very much involved in those conversations when our producers are really not, right? So I guess that's the what's been occupying most of our time for the last year or so, and certainly will be preoccupying a vast majority of my time from now until July. So thanks for that, Leanne, for sending that out. I appreciate that. So if there are no specific questions, I'll hopefully have some time for questions at the end, but I'll just jump to the next slide on current issues. So one of the big things that we're talking about at the FPT table, and I suspect that folks will definitely hear more about this soon enough, is African swine fever. In fact, before COVID hit, I remember we were at an FPT meeting in Toronto. I believe it was in February of 2020. And we spent 2 days focused on African swine fever and what happens when it shows up in Canada, and actually had a tabletop exercise, planning scenarios and things like that. And so at the end of the day, obviously in Newfoundland and Labrador, we find ourselves a little bit insulated geographically from it, but also given the fact that our swine sector is not quite as vast as it is in a lot of other jurisdictions, the implications for it reaching us is fairly low. However, that's not to say if it didn't show up in Newfoundland and Labrador first, that it wouldn't have equally drastic implications for market access for the rest of the country, which is why we need to be just as engaged in the conversation about the implications of African swine fever as everybody else. And I'll get to my lecture on biosecurity in just a moment. But so the business risk management piece, again, I won't say too much more about that, except to say that this is very much occupying a huge amount of time at the FPT table. And I do think there will be changes to the BRM suite of programming, for everybody, including Newfoundland and Labrador producers. And, my hope is that whatever we do, we get it done before July and don't have to spend the next 5 years talking about it as well. So I think most people will be aware now that we've had a couple of incidents of and occurrences of avian influenza in the province. And this has been very concerning because, it goes back, for me anyway, as far back as Ivan said, April Fool's Day in 2011, when Dr. Hugh Whitney, who was our chief veterinary officer at the time, explained to me the risks associated with avian influenza. And I still remember that he used to remind me just about every time I talked to him, when you look up in the sky and you see a flock of 100 waterfowl flying overhead, probably 5 of them are infected with H5N1, or at least H5. And so I've been thinking about that ever since. And, the reality is that the only way we can insulate ourselves from this on farm is to ensure that we are doing our level best in the biosecurity space, and to take very careful steps to ensure there's no interaction between wildlife and livestock on farm. And of course, this extends out even further now, and to the point where, companies like Country Ribbon, who are responsible for distribution of feed for a lot of people in this province, obviously at times like this, they have to take very careful steps to ensure that nobody, whether or not they're livestock producers, are bringing this, by wheels on their vehicles and things like that into their property, because it has immediate market implications potentially for the rest of Canada when that happens. And so, obviously we were very concerned when H5N1 was pronounced in Newfoundland and Labrador to be here, what the rest of the world might think in terms of market implications. And to be honest, we were concerned that the US might suddenly place a border closure at the US-Canadian border for Canadian poultry products. And, that didn't happen in the end, but, there were trade implications, which, largely became, invisible to a lot of us. But believe it or not, I believe it was China did place a trade restriction for Newfoundland and Labrador poultry going into China, which, obviously there isn't a whole lot of that happening anyway. But, the concern was it could just as easily have been Canadian poultry, which would have had a huge impact. So I guess my message in H5N1 is that, this has been a gentle reminder that we all need to ensure that we are doing our level best in the biosecurity space. And I do think that as a result of these occurrences, and to be honest, I don't think we've seen the last one, but as a result of these occurrences, there may be changes coming in terms of how we manage backyard flocks and things like that. So that's on to my next point. In the minister's mandate letter, there's also a commitment to undertake a review of agriculture legislation. We've been talking about this for quite some time, and I think that you're going to see the process started very soon towards the development of a full body of new agriculture legislation, probably to be completed over the span of a couple of years. That's how much effort that needs to go into this, and will likely include a conversation about what I just mentioned about biosecurity and backyard flocks and things like that. Very soon. And obviously everybody, on this call will be invited to participate in the consultations on that process. As well, we are also committed to doing a review of the Animal Health and Protection Act, which was proclaimed, I guess, completely in 2013. We did a review, I believe it was in 2015, when made some minor changes to it at that time. But we are committed now to doing it again, another full review. When we proclaimed it in 2013, it was widely seen as being, some of the most progressive legislation for animal welfare in the country. And I guess there's been a lot of provincial jurisdictions that have done their own reviews now. And, you know, we just felt it was time to re-engage stakeholders and to do another review. So clearly our expectation is that anybody who has an interest in livestock specifically, as well as, you know, animal welfare groups, you know, would have an opinion on this. And we would invite you to participate in consultations that are expected to be wrapped up before the end of March. So we got a little bit of work to do to get that done. And of course, the last issue on my list is about aquaculture. And so this is also now a real-time conversation at our CAP table, our Canadian Agriculture Partnership table. And I guess, you know, some jurisdictions, particularly ones who don't have the benefit of having, you know, fisheries development, policy development framework agreements, I guess, you know, are asking for aquaculture to be included as an eligible activity in the new partnership agreement. And so we've definitely got a view on that. We are pushing back very much in terms of my role in this, simply because we have Atlantic Fisheries Fund, which, you know, in fact provides more money to fishermen and aquaculture producers than our agriculture agreement provides to farmers. So, I mean, from our perspective, we just don't see a need for it. But there are jurisdictions like Ontario and Saskatchewan and Alberta who don't have those agreements and are now asking for aquaculture to be included as an eligible activity. So I guess I do have a question. I'll call this a consultation, and I do invite feedback on this. If you could hit the space bar one more time, Matthew. So I guess my question to you to start our question period would be, should aquaculture be considered, in your view, to be an eligible activity under the next policy framework agreement? I'm very interested in your comments on that. And I obviously am committed to bringing back the consensus on this particular question to the tables that I sit on. So I think I only have one more slide. That was pretty quick, Rodney. I did see your earlier question, Catherine, about H5N1 in other places. My understanding is that we do now have a confirmed case in North Carolina or South Carolina, one or the other, but I've not heard any positive occurrences yet in any other province of Canada at this point. But it is going up and down the eastern seaboard as wild waterfowl fly over. You know, you can rest assured that it exists everywhere. So this is one of my favorite pictures. Is actually in the best little community in Newfoundland, which is where I live in Pasadena. You know, every time I see this picture, it really takes my breath away. Actually, this is our own combine harvester that we had procured a number of years ago for research in grains and oilseeds, and obviously that particular activity, as most folks will be aware of now, has actually reached the commercialization stage, and we have a number of farmers now who actually own their own combine harvesters. Their production has gotten to the point where they needed it. So that's been a tremendous success story. So questions, please, including comments on my question to you guys about whether aquaculture should be included in the next policy framework agreement.
Thanks so much, Keith. Let's hope if people have questions, you can put it in the chat. Keith is certainly monitoring that.
So question there from Ed Reed. So I guess I believe aquaponics is expressly stated in the current framework agreement as being ineligible. So I guess at the end of the day, you know, that's part of the question. Should the language in the current framework agreement be modified to include that as eligible?
Keith, you say that there's been some pushback on that. What's sort of the basis of the justifications being used, or what are the arguments going forward about not including it?
So I think that, you know, in particular, our colleagues from Ontario, who again don't have the benefit of a a separate framework agreement for fish. They don't have an Atlantic Fisheries Fund. And, they're being very careful in their approach to this. They're basically saying that they'd like for it to be dedicated to freshwater aquaculture, as well as land-based aquaculture. And for them, I guess they wouldn't have anything else anyway. And they also put forward the argument that, they ought to be able to, allocate their money based on their own priorities that they see in their own jurisdictions. And I have no argument against any of that, except to say that if we were to include it in the multilateral framework agreement, then, it may become a slippery slope once our own aquaculture producers find out they may have access to it. I mean, we have a number of other, in some cases, large corporations then that are competing for the agriculture dollars, right?
You mentioned early on about the new 5-year plan and the importance of sustainability in it. I don't know if you have a sense of whether there'll be some initiatives or incentives for payments for ecosystem services or sustainable practices. Is that something that's being bandied about at the table?
Absolutely, Ivan. So there's today's discussion was very much focused on best management practices. There was some talk about cross-compliance, about incentives for people who are doing the right thing in the environment climate change space towards business risk management benefits, right? So I guess there's also been some discussion about possible incremental funding for climate change activities and reallocating money from one envelope to the other to actually expand the envelope for climate change and environmental sustainability out of existing funding. So there's no question, as I said in my preamble, the targets that have been expressed are ambitious, but it's time for ambition in this particular space. I think we'd all agree to that. And, I think what you're going to find in the new agreement is that there's a definite focus on climate change and environment, no question about it.
If nobody asks questions, I'll keep peppering them with questions. You see, that's the problem. No, I don't know if you, like me, I'm really waiting for the 5-year Canada statistics agriculture census to come out. They did it last year. It's coming out in late spring or whatever. What do you expect to see in that related to Newfoundland and Labrador?
Well, I think the trend that we've seen in the most recent numbers is that what we've been doing has been having an impact. I get the sense that there is a lag in terms of the data that we have access to, because Cindy McDonald's on the call. We actually in our Canadian Agriculture Partnership and our applications for a provincial program, we track these metrics. We want people to tell us how much they're increasing their land base and what impact this is actually having on food production and our overall objective to double our food self-sustainability footprint. So I think that we tend to see the progress more rapidly, I think, than you'll find in the agriculture census. But I am expecting to see progress in that particular space, and we have been seeing it in the most recent census too. So not as much as I would have thought, but we are seeing it.
There was a comment earlier sort of related to your discussion about how in Newfoundland and Labrador we're actually opening up land, which is something that people are criticizing these days. But the comment was that we actually are maybe at a better advantage because we don't have to recover land that has been eroded of all of its topsoil and so on and so forth. Do you think about the sort of the positive aspect? We're a smaller industry. We sort of know each other. Are there some benefits as well that you think we have?
So absolutely. I can't remember which meeting it was. I think it was a meeting of our agriculture research group that we used to meet biannually and pull together academics from, all over North America. And I do recall the dean of the University of Guelph agriculture faculty making a comment at one of those sessions that he's not aware of any other jurisdiction in the world that is making new agricultural land the way that we are. And I absolutely see all sorts of benefits. I mean, it was incredible in terms of the activity that this generated last year from people that we had no idea about agriculture. I mean, we had forestry contractors applying for tenders and bids to clear agricultural land, and did a great job with it. And when it got done, they were calling, looking for more. So I mean, there's all sorts of economic return that created just in the work to get the land cleared. But also, I mean, the production that we've seen in places like Junction Brook. I mean, you heard the minister. I'll never forget when we went out and did our visual inspection this fall out to Junction Brook. And as we were driving past the potato fields, he looked out and saw these little short stalks. He referred to them yesterday. And he looked at me and sitting in the passenger seat of the truck, he said, "There's no potatoes there." He said, "I'm convinced of it. They're just not there. The stalks are too short." And he said, "Back home in Greens Pond, my stocks are 10 times higher than that, right?" So anyways, he jumped out of the truck and ran over the field with his rubber boots on, stuck a shovel in the ground, and he could not believe the potatoes that he dug up. There were potatoes there almost as big as basketballs, right? And so I think that the producers themselves also were, a little overwhelmed with the level of productivity that they saw coming out of areas like that. So it was encouraging. I think that that particular exercise showed a lot of people that the possibilities are high. We should expect more from agriculture than we have been. So.